welcome, and thanks for coming out. It's exciting to see everybody out here tonight. On behalf of the Upper Valley Transformational Action Affinity Group, I want to thank you for coming out, compliment you for being so aware of this issue, and compliment you also for your care for your community looking forward. Tonight's presentation is going to be something kind of unique, I think. The history is that at a certain point we realized we wanted to do some kind of a forum or presentation, and the first thought that came to our mind is, well, there's this expert or that expert, and we'll bring them in to speak on this subject. And then the next meeting we came back and we hadn't quite connected with who that expert would be, and there were 6 people sitting around the circle, and we said, you know what, no, let's just do it ourselves. So that's what we proceeded with. And so what you're going to see tonight are 6 different 10-minute presentations that are the issue of the natural gas pipeline divided into 6 topics. Those topics are the environmental. I'll start off. General overview to the pipeline. What's potentially emerging in our neighborhood. The environmental impacts. The impacts of methane on the environment. Health impacts. The economic profile of fracked gas extraction. Alternatives to natural gas as a heating source, and then finally we'll get into kind of deeper dialogue about the approach to organizing that this particular group, and that is Upper Valley Transformational Action Affinity Group, is working with. So Karen's going to talk a little bit about a transformational approach to social change and how we can work together. When we were talking about how many people, Stuart said, oh, maybe 80 people will come into the room, and indeed, it didn't strike me that it would go that way. But I guess there's something about pipelines which just excites the imagination. and of course, we're walking in the footsteps of some unbelievable leadership that has been coming forward at the national level over at Standing Rock. I should also mention that this particular action group, UVTAG, has been benefiting greatly from a couple of people who came to this issue a long time before we did, which is Stuart Blood and Ariel Arwin, of course. Ariel Arwin, who had done a lot of the research to sort of get us oriented so we can hit the ground running and understand the landscape that we're entering into. So now that we that I referred to can hopefully include a larger group. This what's going on here is ripe for broader involvement, and that is the point of what we're up to here today. So for people here who are looking for very current, very, very, very important issue to plug into, let's work together and think about how all this unfolds with that in mind. Think about that idea as we're going through this. This is the first time that many of us have done anything like this, so there may be some kind of little tiny mini technical glitch that happens or whatever. Just bear with us. Maybe not. If it all goes smoothly, you'll know we're money players. We're going to go, after we go through, we'll ask that you hold on to your questions until we get through the presentation. So after we go through the 6 of them, then we'll have a chance to get into broader discussion and any burning questions that need to be answered. There is a sign-up, Ariel suggesting that if you think of a question and you think you might forget it, we'll pass around these little slips of paper here that people can write them down. You can remind yourself at the time. We won't be able to get to all of the questions that are coming up, and we may not actually know the answer to all of the questions that might be coming up, but we'll give it our best shot. There is a sign-up sheet going around for people who would like to be on an email list to be informed about. Okay, there it is. Thank you for putting your email down if that's something that you'd like to do. And there is a donation box. So there's an opportunity if you'd like to give financially to this cause. It's right there on that table. Feel free to write to drop off cash or write a check. Check to who? You can write a check to the Center for Transformational Practice, okay, or CTP. Okay. And we'll allocate the funds accordingly. Michael says there are refreshments in the back, so if anybody wants to get up at any point and get yourself a glass or a cookie, something like that. Thank you, Ariel, for bringing that forward. Okay, so our first presentation, again, this is an overview presentation from Ariel Irwin. She asked the question: is a gas pipeline, if a gas pipeline comes to Lebanon and Hanover, can we reach our 100% renewable goals? Here you go, Ariel.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I'm going to be speaking about this. If a frack gas pipeline system in Lebanon and Hanover comes into play, can we accomplish renewable goals that we are working on very hard? Because we cannot have both. Liberty Utilities wants to truck liquefied natural gas, and I have natural in quotation marks because there's nothing natural about it, or it's known as LNG, to Lebanon. The site that they have selected is south of the landfill on 12A. They want to build a storage and regasification unit to turn it back into gas because it's liquefied. They make the gas very cold to transport it in a liquid form. And then they want to build an 11.5-mile pipeline. So this is a map. This is 12A. This is the Connecticut River. Not the River, Mascoma River, sorry. It's a river. Connecticut River, okay. I've only lived there 4 years, but I should know that. This is the outline of their property. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. They want to provide natural gas to potentially 9,225 customers in Lebanon and Hanover. So the starting point is, I'll work for a minute. Simon, what am I doing wrong?
Or point it to the projector, Ariel.
Or you just use your finger.
Yeah, you should.
I had a yardstick at home already, but he said, no, we've got to leave it.
Ariel, point it to the projector.
She's looking for the laser.
I know.
Oh, is that what it is?
Oh,
I'm sorry, thanks, Mom.
Did I saw it?
Yeah, I think she went for it.
It's okay, I use my finger. I used to teach third grade, so I'm used to it. So, this is the beginning of the 11.5-mile pipe, the nice red line. This is going up 12A, passing 2 shopping plazas, which are potential customers, one with Walmart and Price Chopper, etc., and one with Kohl's and CVS, etc. Turning east, passing, this is Route 4, going east, passing Timken, which is a potential customer, passing Clean Laundry, which is a potential customer. They already truck LNG, so they would be very interested in this because it would save them a bit of money and it would save them having trucks being delivered on a frequent basis. And this is Alice Pick Hospital, which is also a potential anchor customer. For some reason, they stopped their red line there. They shouldn't have, because on another slide, Simon.
Your battery's probably dead.
If you're trying to flip the slide, point it at the computer.
So, what are you trying to do? Oh, advance it?
Yes.
All right, just, I think the battery in this thing is going. I'll see if I can get that.
Nice. So Alice Pick Day, we continue, and we go further north onto Hanover Street, exit 18, north on 120, past Lebanon High School, past Dartmouth Coach, past, I think it's on the next slide. Here's an elementary school. Here's Centera, another possible customer. PHMC is a big potential anchor customer. Heading north. And eventually ends up in Hanover. Lebanon High School was somewhere down here, nearby. So it's Dartmouth College is there, downtown Hanover is there. So that's their goal. And I have to say it was their goal for the last almost 2 years. They were in a docket before the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission, competing at that time with another kind of a startup gas company, Valley Green. And both of those dockets were kind of tossed out. Neither one had signed documentation from any anchor customers. So the staff of the Public Utilities Commission and the Consumer Advocate's Office recommended against both dockets because they felt there would be an undue burden on ratepayers. So it was suggested to Liberty that they submit a new petition, which is what we have here. And rumor has it that Liberty Utilities, if in the future they want to have 2 sites, that they have an option on some of the Valley Green land, which is in the Signal Hill area. But that was just something that was told to me, so it's not for sure. So those red pipelines to me are very upsetting, and I would rather have read things like this. This is Kate Bush, an English actress and singer who's fantastic. So, if natural gas becomes available via pipe, this was written by Stewart, I have to give credit where credit is due, in the Upper Valley, the gas company will advertise the superiority of its product based on the currently low price, and you'll be hearing more about that later, talking about the projected price, and misleading claims about low emissions, and you'll be hearing more about that as well. They may offer incentives to convert heating systems from other fuels. And once customers have made the investments to convert, they are very unlikely to switch to a renewable energy source because their capital has been locked up in the gas system. There's a term for that. It's called carbon lock-in. When new fossil fuel infrastructure is built, lasting and depreciating over 40 to 50 years, which is what the documentation for Liberty's petition cites, it delays the transition to renewable energy sources. And there's research saying that even though it's fairly common sense, there's research. We need research for everything. So the proposed site is mostly, substantially, I'm told, by the City of Lebanon Planning Department, mostly outside of the special flood hazard area, which is the orange and yellow. But Liberty's petition, that's what they call it at the PUC, will require the planning board to review the issue regarding flooding, potential flooding, because in Irene, there was flooding that happened, and who knows the future. And they will be needing a special exemption from the zoning board for the bulk storage of petroleum products. So these two processes in the future are times when your presence and letter writing will be very helpful. We had a bunch of people helping us over the last couple years, and they showed up in Lebanon when Valley Green wanted to get an extension to the variance on the Signal Hill property, and people spoke and people stood outside with signs, and those things matter. So this is what we want. This is what we need. And this is what people all around the Upper Valley are working for, and some of them, lots of them are in this room now. And we don't want this. We don't want, this is projection of what Liberty says they pretty much need to have to make this a viable business proposal. 1.3 to 1.6 billion cubic feet of gas per year. And the 3 anchor customers, potential anchor customers, account for 1 billion of that. So the cost gets aggregated. It's like economies of scale, they say. So this is what we want. There's many examples. Pat McGovern is here in the front row, and she's done beautiful work on a Leb Energy blog and has photographs from all over Lebanon, because it's a Lebanon blog. Nothing from Hanover here, sorry. But this is the Lebanon Middle School with some solar. This is not what we want. This is what fracking fields look like, because they don't last for that many years. I think maybe they peak out around 8 years, and then they have to drill another one. Lebanon and Hanover are working to get to 100% renewable. There's a bunch of solar, one per heart. The Sierra Club has a Ready for 100% campaign with 25 cities in the U.S., including Hanover, New Hampshire, and the greater Upper Valley, working toward 100% renewable energy by 2050. One 100% model, is a renewable electric grid by 2030. Not an easy task, but got to find a way. With everything electric by 2050, including heat and transportation. So there are a lot of different models, and some people want to use biomass and wood, and some people think we shouldn't have any emissions whatsoever. There are all kinds of studies and conversations going on, but lots of people know we have to do this. The town of Hanover will vote, and sorry, I have to correct this, it's May 9th, on those renewable goals, which were endorsed by Sustainable Hanover, their energy committee, and adopted by resolution by the Hanover Select Board. So kudos to them for kind of leading the way in an official manner. The Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee and many others in Lebanon are working hard toward renewable goals. Cliff Below is the chair of Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee, and he's been very active lately in front of the PUC with the net metering docket and the grid modernization docket, and he's talking to people in Hanover and vice versa on this energy aggregation model. There are a lot of exciting things going on. So this is one thing that can happen if we get all renewable electricity, EVs charged with solar or other renewables, bicycles, and whistling. This is probably the best slide of the whole evening, so soak it up. A couple weeks ago, Lebanon residents in this room is where I voted, just voted to facilitate the expansion of solar. It used to be that if you had it on your property, you could only use it for your own use, but now it's non-accessory, which means you can share if you have excess, or put a tracker on your lawn or something, you can share it with others. Hanover and Lebanon are working together toward community solar, and if you haven't gotten one of these, please get one before the end of the evening. They're on the table. The last event upcoming is here and all on the back. It's all about community solar. It's got a really great panel of people. It's all listed here. Offshore wind is a huge renewable source. And the Ready for 100 campaign of the Sierra Club has as a major base the work of Mark Jacobson from Stanford, who's an engineer, who heads up the Solutions Project. And so he analyzes all the different states and gives kind of ballpark, like how can we get there? And offshore wind is a big part of it. So the Gulf of Maine has the strongest wind potential in the U.S., even stronger than the West Coast, including the coast of New Hampshire. And it feeds into ISO New England, and it feeds all of New England. So Vermont can use that energy. So this is, I'm not sure if that's Block Island or not. Block Island Wind Farm off of Rhode Island, this is Block Island, which is the first wind farm in the U.S., came online last August. And there's a 15 turbine wind farm that I just heard of on the radio that was approved to be built off of Long Island. And they build these at least 10 miles offshore, so people cannot see them, or a variety of reasons. And if you look at a wind farm map of Europe, there's tons of wind along the coast of Europe. So we're just starting. So one option, if we get all renewable electricity, is that we can heat in a variety of ways. And one option is a heat pump run on renewable electricity. So this is an air source heat pump. It says warmth is extracted from air and transferred to the underfloor heating or direct into the air inside the home. So Dartmouth Coach, for example, recently built a new building and they heat with heat pumps. And later, Tricia is going to be presenting on renewable options for heating, because the gas that's coming here is mostly going to be used for heating. I forgot to mention Pike Industries, which is very near the site on Cove, which is a major anchor customer potentially. They already truck natural gas, and they use it for processing, making asphalt. So it can be used for different things. So no more fossil fuels. We need to leave them in the ground. These are the major shale plays. Shale is the kind of layer that fracking stands for hydraulic fracturing. So there's a slide coming up showing how it works, but this is called the Marcellus shale play, and it covers a bunch of states, including big swath of Pennsylvania. Gas land was fashioned around that part of it, and it goes into New York State, although New York State has banned fracking. But it's very likely that the gas coming here would be on the backs of the people who live in that area. And 15 minutes, sorry. And Michael will be talking about health impacts of the people. These are pipelines in the U.S. Just a few. Dangers of fracking. So this is called unconventional drilling, which goes down and then horizontally. So this is the shale layer. This is the aquifer. So if there's leaking or whatever, it gets into the water. That's a well. So if we want to slow or stop, depending on your point of view, runaway climate change, we need to reduce emissions quickly. So this is regarding just 2030. There are lots of ways to engage. Please sign this sign-in sheet if you're so moved, and look at this page, because this talks about things going forward. We've had a lot of meetings and forums over the last 1 3/4 years, and we haven't really provided too many opportunities for people to engage after the forums. So we're trying to change that. And the good thing is that this time around, there are 3 sets of interveners: the City of Lebanon, myself and John Chaffee, and then some people from Upper Valley Young Liberals. This time around, there's a lot of awareness. UV tag, there are a lot of different groups, maybe because of the election, wanting to do something. So it's wonderful. So thank you very much. Sorry,
Hi, everybody. I'm going to do a little bit of talking about natural gas and the climate. And I'm going to start with just some basics. Run through it real quickly, because I'm sure everybody in this room knows all this information already. But there's a scientific consensus that we need to stick to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. I guess I want to be here. Increase in global temperatures in order to maintain any hope of avoiding runaway climate change. These numbers, these temperatures are all increases since the pre-industrial age. So if we continue with the emissions rates that we've got today, we're going to blow past 4 degrees C by the end of the century. And even if we get all of the countries to meet all of their commitments that they made at the Paris climate talks a year and a half ago, we're going to exceed 3 degrees C. Let me talk a little bit about the carbon budget. 3 years ago, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published for the first time, quantified a carbon budget, which is the cumulative increase in human-generated carbon emissions into the atmosphere that would be consistent with keeping temperature to within 2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. Roughly speaking, that budget is 1,000 gigatons of carbon. As of last year, we were somewhat more than halfway into that budget, and we have somewhat over 40% of that budget remaining to us. The really scary part is that of the remaining climate budget, more than 5 times that amount is accounted for by gas and oil reserves that are already controlled by companies. We need to have a trajectory where the emissions peak within the next very few years. The IPCC has published a trajectory that is plausible to keep us within a 2-degree temperature rise that would require peak emissions by the year 2020, and then those emissions cut in half within the next 20 years by 2040, and go to virtually zero by 2070. So within 55 years, we need to have be at virtually zero human-generated carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions.
Is this worldwide?
This is worldwide, yeah. The inescapable conclusion from that is that most of the fossil fuel needs to be kept in the ground. So, darn, I wish I had that slide. What we want to contemplate is if we're going to be cutting our emissions in half in the next 20 years, where does new fossil fuel infrastructure fit into that picture? And in particular, where does a gas pipeline that has a life of 50 years fit into that picture? 50 years is the amount of time that the Public Utilities Commission allows the gas utility company to pay, to collect the time during which they pay off their capital investment from utility rates. So, not getting to the meat of the presentation is the natural gas industry says, in fact, Liberty Utilities is claiming in testimony before the Public Utilities Commission that switching to gas from other fossil fuels will be better for the climate. The question is that true? So let's natural gas is clean burning compared to other fossil fuels because it's mostly methane, and when it's burned, it produces less carbon dioxide per unit of energy released than other fossil fuels. So the gas industry has been touting natural gas as a bridge fuel to get us through this transition that we're supposedly in, that we are in, to renewables. I guess I'm supposed to be over here being filmed. There's a big downside. Methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So there's a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there is methane. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for centuries, whereas methane will break down relatively rapidly. It has a half-life of 12 years, which means that half of the methane that's emitted at any time will break down into carbon dioxide in water in 12 years. And then 12 years later, another half will break down. So they have to, the scientists have had to do some modeling, some calculations to kind of compare methane's global warming potential to carbon dioxide. And so because it breaks, it's a strong greenhouse gas that breaks down rapidly, it has a worse effect over 20 years. It's 86 times more heat trapping over 20 years, and 34 times worse over 100 years. So the conclusion, which I'll back up in another slide too, is that if only a small amount, relatively, of methane leaks unburned into the atmosphere, then coal is worse than oil or even, gas is worse than oil or coal for the climate. And that's the problem, because a lot of methane leaks, both at the well during extraction and during transmission in pipes. Hydraulic fracturing, as Ariel started to describe, is the process where very high pressure fluids are forced into a well, and that pressure forces methane uncontrolled out of the bore. Fracking has increased dramatically since 2005, and it now accounts for more than half the natural gas production in the U.S. Oops. How much methane is leaking? Until recently, all of the data we had was coming from the gas and oil industry, so we didn't really know until recently. Reported leakage rates vary, but too much is leaking. There's a team of scientists at Cornell that has pulled together data and concluded that the greenhouse gas footprint for gas is larger than coal or oil, quote, for any possible use of natural gas, and particularly for the primary uses of residential and commercial heating, which is how that would be used, how natural gas would be used in the Upper Valley. Leakage estimates keep going up. So independent assessments of leak rates have increased over the last 5 years. As a result, the EPA has had to revise its estimate upward last year, 2016. Satellite measurements indicate rapidly increasing methane emissions in the U.S. Corresponding to the fracking boom. So 30% increase between 2002 and 2014 in methane in the U.S. Could account for 30 to 60% of the global growth in methane in the last decade. This is from a study done at Harvard last year. When independent measurements are made at various sources of leaks, they invariably show emissions rates higher than official estimates. So I won't go into that any further. So Liberty Utilities has testified before the PUC and made claims that natural gas has lower emissions than fuels that would replace. However, we have to consider the entire life cycle of natural gas, from the wellhead through transportation to the burner tip. And when we do that, gas is worse for the climate than the other fuels that it would replace, especially considering how it would be used in the Upper Valley for heat, and the fuels that it would replace here, oil and propane. So these are some examples of leaks. This is methane escaping in a well. well, it's not connected to a pipeline, just blowing up, just venting uncontrolled. Here's a pipeline that is being vented to release pressure. Methane leaks around Boston. And that. So that's it.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit about some science. I'm not a scientist. I was a research assistant in a growth and motor development lab when I was an undergraduate, so I know a little bit of science, more around physiology. I do know a little bit also about growth and development, and some of the best science about how fracked gases and some of the chemicals that are used in that process, how it affects fetus growth. And of course, there's no longitudinal studies, so we don't know how does this affect these children 20 years down the road, right? So we're going to get into some of that. But I always want to know my audience here a little bit, right? Because I want to know. I work in healthcare, right? And I like the word, or the part of the word at the end of healthcare, care. And the reason why I'm doing this piece is because I care, right? And I want to know my audience here. How many people work in healthcare or have? Okay. How many teachers? All right. Any religious leaders or clergy? Okay. How many parents or grandparents? All right. How many people live in New Hampshire? How many people live in Vermont? Other states? All right. Well, we got that covered. All right. Does anybody in here care about the health of our children and our grandchildren? All right. How many people care about the people living near these wells and their health? All right. We're all on the same page, right? So it's good to know that, because that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. People often say, I've been criticized, because I'm a little bit outspoken at times. I've been criticized by my fervor, my what I call it my care, right? Hopefully I'm gentle in my care. And I've been criticized, and somebody once recently said to me, I won't use the words that they use, but they basically said, you know, I care too much, I'm a liberal, you know, I don't have all my facts, da-da-da-da, they went on and went on. And they said, why do you do all this? And I said it, because I care, right? And because I partly have a scientific brain, I looked at a lot of this research. Now, you know, they call it natural gas, right? But I like this term, unconventional natural gas development, which we know is called fracked gas, all right? Okay. Between 2009 and 2015, there was over 685 papers, peer-reviewed professional papers, right? In the months we've been meeting, I probably read about 200, right? I've called scientists. I called some of these people that wrote these papers. They gave me more links and more people to talk to. And most importantly, I called people who live in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, near Dimmock, PA. And I talked to people, Kelly could attest to this. Last night I was up to 12:45 a.m., 4 hours and 45 minutes, talking to a guy that I'm going to show you a slide about, Ray Kemble. And he talked to me about all the health problems that he was having. His brother died 6 months ago of cancer. He's been diagnosed with cancer. People within 6 miles of living with him, 6 people, his friends, his neighbors, have cancer. So, and I talked to other people. So there's a lot of studies, right? There's a lot of studies showing the dangers of this. Some of the studies are what's happening in the fracked wells. You know, people have mentioned gas lands, and you see all this stuff that's coming in the wells, right? They made it kind of, you know, very dramatic. People would light their wells because of the methane coming off. But you know the more dangerous part of methane, if you take showers with it, people get migraines and nosebleeds, gum bleeds, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So the EPA concluded a report released in 2016 that hydraulic fracturing and oil contaminates groundwater and surface water and has contaminated many private wells, despite the arguments that the industry says you can't prove that we did it. But these people didn't have any issues before, right? So So we talked about how hydraulic fracturing is done. You know, so they bore down these holes. They go straight down. The old way of doing it, right, was they just bored straight down and they did it. Now they're going perpendicular or going horizontal to the groundwater. And so what's happening when they fracture this stuff, where's all these chemicals going? They try to pull some of it out and put them in storage tanks. They also try to cart it places, and they also put them in these pools, right? Which these things have been known to leak, because what they do after they make these big pools and they put all this water and these gases and these chemicals in those pools, they cement it over. And the vapor barrier is a little bit more than 6 mil. That's not a lot. You know, 6 mil is the things we usually use to put down when we're painting, right? They don't know how many of the chemicals are being pumped into these wells. Again, as Stuart said, a lot of the data we've gotten has been from the industry, right? The EPA only knows, they can only know a little bit about the toxicity about 98 of these chemicals out of the 1,084. And some people have challenged me in a good way and said, I think you're underestimating the amount of chemicals that they're using, and they're probably using more now, right? So these chemicals, right, are making people sick. I talked to a professor from the University of Pennsylvania and a doctor, and they were talking about a study they did where there's been an increase in hospitalizations for people with heart conditions, neurological illnesses, and other conditions, higher, about 27% higher of people living within so many miles of fracked wells. The study looked at hospitalization in 18 zip codes. So they compared people who lived near these gas wells against people who didn't live near them, right? And again, there was a 27% increase in cardiology inpatient prevalent rates, right, compared to these other counties that they compared them against. So other things that they found, right, is people were getting skin conditions, people were getting cancer, urological conditions, and these are all people who live near wells. One of the best studies, and this has been duplicated, is that they looked at low birth rates. Again, I mentioned this in the beginning. We don't know the long-term effects. I know something about growth and development. What happens when you have low birth rates? We know this from people in other countries, especially poor countries. Thank you. People in poor countries whose children are undernourished, and what happens and their risk and health factors. They're starting to look at some of that, but again, we don't have a lot of longitudinal evidence yet, right? So, some of the toxic chemicals, how many people know about some of these chemicals? They include hydrocarbons, you know, like methane, volatile organic compounds, VOCs, radionuclides, toxic metals like arsenic, barium, strontium, and they also know that we're actually getting radiological stuff coming out of here. Benzene is probably the worst. I don't have time. I was going to show you this little video, or part of this little video. This Dr. Dahlgren, he went into extensive scientific detail about how these chemicals, how dangerous these are to our skin if we inhale it. The sand particles that come out of these wells. There's a, Stuart may know the name. What's it called? There's a condition people get respiratorily from breathing in these sand particles.
Silicosis.
So yes, thank you. Yeah, say that nice and loud again.
Silicosis.
Silicosis, yes, right? And a lot of these workers are getting this stuff. People living near these wells are getting this stuff, all right? There's glycol dehydrators. That's, you know, you saw that in one of the slides. They try to dehydrate some of the chemicals off. Well, that goes into the atmosphere. This is leading people to nosebleeds, gum disease. One of the people I talked to, she had her top palate was deteriorating. She moved, her name, I'll get to her in the last slide because I can't remember her name, but most people, 44 million people, rely on private wells in these areas for their water supply, for bathing, drinking, feeding their cattle, right, and their herds and stuff in Pennsylvania. And their water wells are contaminated. They have to put in these buffaloes, which are these big holding containers, and go every day and get water. They used to get it provided by the companies, but since there was some science that came out that couldn't prove exclusively that it was the fracking that caused it, the company said, oh, we don't have to give you water anymore, so you got to get it on your own. And because methane, you know, it doesn't have a smell, a color, or a taste, right? it's not really regulated. So we're starting to know the dangers of methane. That's the stuff, that you see people lighting their water on fire, and gas lines. There's millions and millions of gallons of water that it takes to produce fracking. And these waters are full of chemicals, full of dangers, and they're really starting to look at the research. Again, it can cause damage to your brain, your eyes, your skin, your nervous system with direct contact. The salts and the metals and the radioactive compounds now are being released, and it's coming up, actually bubbling up in people's wells, in their ponds. These permanent flares that they do where they burn off some of these chemicals, people are breathing them, right? And people in these wells, I talked to numerous, and they all got nosebleeds, right? You might be able to not look at the science and say, well, geez, people, they can cause other things, but it's this PM 2.5 produced burning volatile organic compounds that usually cause this, all right? So I want to end just by the human stories. Ray Kemble was a gentleman that I spoke to last night for 4 hours, 45 minutes. I spoke to him once before. He's been getting headaches from the methane. 6 of his neighbors and his brother all have developed cancer. He's moving as soon as he gets a settlement. He's in a lawsuit right now with the company. And so as soon as he gets a settlement, he's going to settle out of court. He said, I'm moving to Florida, but I hope they don't start fracking there. Right. And this other woman I spoke to for over 4 hours, her name is Rebecca Reuter. She talked about having nosebleeds, ulcerated gums, developed lesions on her hard palate. She was getting lumps in her lymph nodes, swollen neck, jaw, sinus and ear infections. She had to get a water buffalo and get the water trucked in. She was borrowing Ray's truck to go get the water. They were sharing the truck. And she moved away, and she also has an anxiety disorder because her animals died. She had a small working farm. She was worried about her father's health, and she moved away. And all I want to say is that, we can argue the science, we can look at all the science we want. My point again is, and where I want to end is, I care about what happened to these people. I have relatives in central Pennsylvania. And it makes me think, when I was a kid, I used to fish there, I used to camp out there, I used to hang out with family, and this environment is getting polluted more and more. So thank you for your time.
Okay, this is a topic that's been interesting. It has interested me for a number of years. This is a topic that has been interested me for a number of years, and we've been hearing this mantra for quite a while now that we have 100 years of gas and tight oil, and that it's a new panacea for our country and so forth. So what I want to investigate here is whether or not this is actually fact or whether this is fiction. A lot of the information that I used came from people who are, like Art Berman, for instance, is a geologist with 38 years of experience, and he and his colleagues investigated the actual numbers of thousands of these fracking wells from 12 different plays, the 12 plays that constitute about 88% of the total gas production and oil production across the country. And so these aren't just speculative numbers. These are actual numbers that were compiled from real data. And one thing I wanted to mention was that a lot of the information that we're hearing in these mantras of 100 years of gas come from the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, which is a subsidiary of our Department of Energy. And in the past, they've made wild claims about the amount of reserves that are available, and then later, quietly, revised those numbers down, like the Marcellus shale gas was revised down tremendously, or the Monterey was revised down by 96%. So we only hear the first number in the media, but the second number a few years later, after they actually come out and they don't want to appear like complete fools, they basically report the actual number, something that's much more close to the real number. So the 100-year value is just completely bunk. for a number of different reasons. And it's a complex industry, to say the least. So, according to the numbers of these wells, when they studied the profile of how much gas came out of these wells, all the wells decline with a parabolic curve. So you can see how each one of these this is the average well output for these different plays, the Eagle Ford, the Marcellus, and so forth. They all decline. So after 3 years of production, they basically only have about 15% of what they originally had when they first were fracked. And since these wells cost, $5 to $10 million a piece, many of the wells never even pay for themselves. For the wells that were investigated in one of the oldest plays in Texas, basically they found that 94% of the wells lost money. And that's when the price of gas and oil was much higher. So in the past, what we've seen in terms of supply and demand and the price for gas and oil is whenever the price of gas or oil has gone down, producers basically slow down their production, and so that basically the price will go back up, because they know they can't make any money if the price is too low. Their costs are continually rising as oil and gas resources, basically the easy to get stuff, the stuff that like when we first started our oil revolution, so to speak, our fossil fuel revolution, you would drill a hole in the ground and oil would shoot up out of the ground. Those days are long gone. Now, fracking, basically, the reason why it's so expensive is because they have to drill down very far, and then they have to drill out from there in multiple directions, as we've already seen in other people's presentations. And they have to use about 1 million gallons of water for every well. And they have to use sand and noxious chemicals in order to lubricate the sand, so that basically they'll frack the rock, and the oil comes from all the little cracks and fissures in the rock, and those fissures are held open by the sand. So it's a very expensive, complicated process, and so that's why 94% of the wells basically lost money in, I believe it was the Eagle Ford. So what we're finding is that these companies, basically the major players like Exxon and Mobil and all these companies, got out of the tight oil and tight gas industry quite a while ago, simply because they realized right away that it was a losing proposition. But a lot of these tight oil and tight gas companies basically have to borrow money in order to drill these wells. And in order to pay the interest on their debt, which is constantly increasing because most of the wells lose money, they have to drill wells at a faster and faster rate. So for instance, the Bakken, according to Art Berman, the Bakken play, which is the North Dakota play, in order to just have a flat level of production for the entire play, they have to drill 45% more wells each year. So that was amounting to about 1,500 wells per year. Now the reason why the production of the Bakken is going up is because they were basically drilling 2,000 wells at some point. But since they're losing money per well on most of the wells, I mean there are sweet spots where they can make money, but those only amount to like 10 to 15% of the entire play, and those are the ones that they go after first. So in a lot of these plays, the sweet spots are already gone. And so they only get about half as much gas from the regular wells that amount to all the other spots that they go to after the sweet spots are gone. And so a lot of their estimates are based on numbers that are as if all of the wells were sweet spots, if all the wells were the high producing wells, when in fact most of the wells will take twice as many drill pads in order to get the same amount of gas out, which means that they're going to lose even more. So already, according to Art Berman, we've seen a peak in the overall production of gas, and part of that is the reason. Part of that reason is because basically because these companies have to drill wells at a faster and faster rate in order to pay their debt service. It's caused a glut of supply on the market. That's why our gasoline prices are so low, and that's why the price of natural gas per unit is so low. And that's the reason why companies like Dartmouth and so forth are looking at natural gas, saying, "Oh, look at this cheap energy." And the government and all the industry are saying that we have 100 years of this stuff, so it totally makes sense to invest all this money in infrastructure we need to use this cheap energy. But they're not being told is the fact that these companies, they want to increase the demand so that they're hoping the price point goes up to the point where they actually can make money. Because right now they're all losing money. So this is the cost per million cubic feet of gas. So it's anywhere between $4 and $6 per MCF. And here's natural gas prices. You can see that they do spike occasionally, but they're all below $4. So you can see how all of the different fracking companies are losing money like there's no tomorrow. So the question I have is, does it really make sense? Does it make economic sense to invest so much money in these pipelines and the LNG terminals and so forth, when in probably just a few years' time, this big Ponzi scheme is going to collapse like all Ponzi schemes do, So here's another one. This is negative cash flow. So when a company basically, say you have a business, and every month you lose money, it's not a very economic business, right? So that's what this is saying, is that this is the negative cash flow, how much money they're losing. And each color represents a different company. So they're all losing money. This goes to 2013, and that's when the price was higher than it is now. So they're losing even more money now, although their costs have gone down a little bit, but not nearly to the point where it becomes economical. Here's another example of this, a little more current, up to 2016. The red is the cumulative loss for the tight oil in the Bakken. So basically, this is the amount of money that their businesses are bleeding. I have 1 minute left. All right. So here we can see the debt for the fracking industry is increasing. So just like all Ponzi schemes, it's reliant on investor money in order to continue, which means banks, pension funds, all of these people who have been fooled into thinking this is a great investment, when in fact, it's no investment at all. It's a great way to lose your money. And all I can think of is Bernie Madoff. How everybody thought Bernie Madoff's pension, or his funds were so great, when in fact it was a huge Ponzi scheme. People lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it all popped just like that. It was very, very quick how the mainstream media came out and said, "Oh, guess what? This was all a farce. You lost your money. Oh, sorry." So basically, when the fracking bubble bursts, what will happen? Many of these fracking companies will close their doors and declare bankruptcy. I mean, that's a given, right? Many have already done that. The investors will lose their money, and there will be a reluctance for banks to loan more money to the industry, which means that any kind of restart-up of this oil and gas craze will be very slow, if not, way too long down the road. And because the supply will plummet, the price of natural gas will rise. So all the people that invest in this infrastructure, like the pipeline and so forth, are betting that the price of natural gas is going to stay the same, when it can't, because the companies are losing money at that price. the price has to be at least twice of what it is just for them to break even. So the supply of natural gas will likely be disrupted. So if you have a big drop-off of supply all of a sudden, and you have all these new companies that are now consuming natural gas, you know, in the drive to rise the price, then you could see actual disruption. So you could see, oh, sorry, we can't get any natural gas this month. So everybody will just have to put on more coats when they go to work, you know. So anyway, that was my my take on this whole thing. So.
So I'm going to be talking about heating in the Upper Valley and how we can probably just jump right over the idea of having to use a lot more natural gas.
Can't hear you.
Okay. So anyway, I just want to say, we all know it's cold up here. We need the super stuff. We can't, you know, and a lot of the local businesses now are already moving towards these new ways of heating and cooling, because most of them can both heat and cool. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Dartmouth Coach, which has a new company building that's heated by heat pumps. The carpet mill is doing the same thing. The very library we are in right now is probably one of the most forward-looking heating systems in the Upper Valley. And schools in Lebanon, Plainfield, and Mascoma Valley are also using pellet boilers, which are, and other heat pumps and other things. But I'd like to kind of look at gas and oil first, and the use in New Hampshire and secondarily in Vermont. This big, huge purple that you see there is oil. So nearly half of the people are using oil still. Vermont is the same thing. Just about 50% of people use oil. The blue here, 20% is gas, natural gas, not propane, and 14% is propane. 9% is wood, but you look at Vermont, 14% is wood. And I would say that a number of years ago, there were even more people heating with wood. I would also mention that wood is an even carbon exchange. The tree takes in carbon, and then when you burn it, it gives it out. And yes, there are pollutants perhaps, but our stoves are a lot cleaner now. And we also, Vermont has 75% wood, New Hampshire has 85% forested. So it might not be the worst thing in the world for us to look at increasing wood use. And the other small amounts, electricity, coal, and a little bit of solar, which is nice. But there's a revolution on the way. So there is a heating myth that, of course, the gas people want you to believe, that natural gas is good and clean and oil is bad and dirty. But as we've seen from some of the other presentations, that fracked gas is not that clean, that methane is released during the extraction and the transport, and everything that comes in here is going to be transported, most likely from the Marcellus Shale. So, you know, and that the water and the people near the wells are adversely affected. So I think that all adds to the cost, whether it's dollar cost or other costs of fracked gas that would be brought in here. I do want to bring up something I discovered in my research. Bioheat is available in the Upper Valley. I never knew this. I called around to all the oil companies and found out that there is one called Simple Energy in Lebanon. They have a low sulfur oil mixed with biodiesel, which is produced mostly from used restaurant cooking oil, and it's produced in Vermont, of all places, the biodiesel that they use. And this emits less carbon than gas, and it's more efficient than regular heating oil. So I leave it up to anybody here that's heating with oil, give them a call, find out, same price. Why don't we switch, to that? So I would have to say that energy efficiency is always, always the first priority. So that short-term solutions for us might be to go ahead and have an energy audit and button up your house as best you can and continue to use the delivered gas that you're getting, or to burn the cleaner oil, or to go ahead and burn wood or pellets. But if you're renovating or you're building new and you want to go green, you can think heat pumps. This is, you obviously should be orienting your house towards the sun. There are a lot of very simple things you can do. But heat pumps are the way of the future, I believe. And as I said, we're sitting right in a building that is heated by heat pumps. There are two kinds of heat pumps. One is geothermal, and the other is air-to-air cold weather heat pumps that work in the coldness that we have up here. So in 2009, the Kilton Library made a very bold decision. They decided to install a geothermal heat pump system. This is really arguably the best system. It's also the most expensive system. But here you see pictures of when they were beginning to dig. And in order to have a geothermal heat pump, you have to dig down into the ground. And the water from the ground wells comes in at 50 degrees because you probably know the frost line is 4.5 feet down. So below that, everything is 50 degrees, even in the middle of winter in January. So that the water, if you dig a well and they bring the water up, which is what they did here, they dug right out back here, they dug 12 wells going down. You can also dig them horizontally if you have enough land. And they bring the water in at 50 degrees. These are their heaters, or furnaces, I guess you could call them, downstairs, that are heating the water from 50 degrees up to what they feel they need to run through the floor. It's a radiant floor system for their heating here. And Lebanon, forward-looking Lebanon, is looking at putting solar on the roof of the library, which is going to make this a completely self-sufficient, energy-efficient system. So I think it's really something to watch and see how all of that happens. This is just a quick way to look at how the ground source heat pumps do work. This happens to be one that's going down in the ground, but it also could be going horizontally and preheating the water and requiring less energy, therefore. The installation of these systems is pretty expensive, but over time it saves you money. And so little by little you catch up with the expense that you've put into it. This is the other kind of heat pump, the air-to-air, cold weather air-to-air heat pumps. These are the kind that can operate mostly in our down to 5 degrees. They say this is effective, and they are improving it all the time. They're really running to get these heat pumps to be more and more efficient. Basically, this is taking heat from the air outside, believe it or not. Even in January, there's heat in the air outside, pushing it inside. It sort of runs on the principle of your refrigerator. It brings it inside, the refrigerant cools and condenses, the heat is released inside, and then the process keeps going on and on. And you often hear about mini splits, and that's what this is used with, which is often something on the wall. Okay, I'm going to call up Bill Knight from the Plainfield School, and he's going to tell us, because they are using air-to-air heat pumps.
Do you mind just running it down?
Oh, yeah, I can run this. Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what she just talked about, which is the building energy retrofit. We did a deep energy retrofit at the Plainfield School. So the best gallon of oil that you burn is the one that you don't, right? So getting cheap stuff, getting renewable stuff, all of that still takes capital. It takes resources that we have in short supply. Every solar panel requires some critical minerals that are reasonably uncommon. So the best thing you can do is not need that energy in the first place. So I was just doing a little mental math while people were chatting about the various concerns with natural gas. So what if you wanted for your home to have enough solar panels to supply an electric car, all the heat that you need, and your lights? Anybody got a guess?
4 kilowatts?
On an average size solar panel, it's about 30 or 40.
No, it turns out it's about 21 kilowatts of installed solar per home. Okay, so I can do Plainfield, for instance. There happens to be 1,000 homes in Plainfield, more or less. Okay, so if you do the math right there, you need 21,000 kilowatts of installed solar in order to make Plainfield green. Okay, so that's a lot of solar. What if it was half that? Because 60% of all of the BTUs, the kilowatt hours that we need, go to heat. Okay, so what we did at Plainfield School is we took, I don't know if you can, how clear all this is, but this is just an example of the things that we did. We replaced the building envelope, we air sealed the building, we put in, this is a demand controlled ventilation system, because once you make a building really tight, you no longer have natural air coming into the building, no longer breathes naturally. Go next slide.
Sorry, I didn't have the second one.
No, that's okay. So one of the things that you want to think about is everybody talked about sort of the supply side issues with natural gas. You know, one of the arguments that gets made is, well, natural gas is actually so clean to burn that it offsets it, right? So if you take a look right here, if you use a heat pump, that's what you're going to produce. And the nice thing about electricity is when you use a heat pump, there are no emissions. There's none. Okay? So this is taking the average electrical generating mix of fuels. That's the tons of CO2. Okay? And then this is natural gas only after it's being burned. So it has no account. So you can see that you're getting very close to natural gas just by using a heat pump. Next. This, you're welcome to peruse this at your leisure, but the bottom line here is that we reduced the energy needs of the Plainfield School for heating by 95%. Okay? So that's a pretty serious decline. We reduced the lighting needs by 40%. All right? So, and you can do this. This is not that hard. We actually saved enough money through our energy reductions to pay for the bonding that was required to repair the school. That's all. A little more. So these were the benefits of our energy retrofit. We have better ventilation than we ever had. It's quieter. We actually have better air quality, and we get to control our humidity. One of the wonderful things about a heat pump is that it cools, and when it cools, it draws moisture out of the air, and in the summer around here we have humid air, and that's not good for you. Lots of folks have heard about the issues with mold in various places around. It's all humidity dependent. If you can keep your house dry enough, you'll never have mold. Do I have one more? Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, so just to sort of wrap it all up, reduce what you need. You're going to have to install a lot of solar, and you're really going to have to think about how we get to 100% renewable, because it's a very ambitious goal.
Awesome. So I just really want to appreciate everyone that's presented and shared all these really important details with us, because they are really important for us to know so that we can understand the ways that we can shift the system. But my presentation is a little bit different. I'm going to take us to the 10,000-foot view, if you will, and talk a little bit about how we're approaching our approach to social change and activism. And you've heard this term a little bit tonight, transformational activism. And there's a group of us that's been meeting for probably 5 or so years that have been working on addressing the inside-out approach to social change. So how are these things connected, like ourselves, the way that we show up in the world, and our ability to impact change. So here's a little diagram that can help to give us some grounding in what we're actually talking about. Some of the theory behind the practice, and that's what I'm kind of connecting the dots between the theory and the practice in hopes that we can apply some of these things to the resistance of this pipeline, so some of the theory stems from the idea behind that some of the problems that we face in the world really come from the separation. What separation? Separation from ourselves, from each other as people sharing our humanity, and also the natural world. So it makes sense then that a solutions approach would really be about reconnecting these things. So if we're not working on all of these levels, then we're failing to address or get close to the root cause of some of the problems. So transformational activism effectively extends an invitation to find the points of connection. So what we're trying to articulate here is that in a lot of activism, and there is a dynamic that's created that creates this us versus them paradigm. And when we create this divide, it really does impede upon our effectiveness to create change. So we really need to identify that and look at what are the ways that we do connect. Where is our intersectionality with the different people that we're working with and the issues that we're facing? And how can we use this approach in our activism to heal those parts of the separations within the different parts of ourselves and our communities? So here's just a couple of things that we've been able to identify that are just good to be aware of, and relational to that inner part. So we can't always just show up and demand that change happens without doing the work ourselves, right? So we're leading by example. We recognize that when we are able to embrace compassion and love, then we're also able to open up to the interconnectedness, not only within ourselves and each other, finding those places to connect, but also between issues, recognizing the importance of connecting environmental and social justice issues as being one and the same. So in our actions, how are these actions both nourishing the activist so that we don't have problems like high rates of burnout, which I know many of us in the room have faced before when we're working on issues that are really challenging emotionally and socially and politically, but nourish us and also the audience we're seeking to shift or change, right? So we have this healing element that can really be incorporated into our approach to activism. So when we approach our work in this way, we find that there are more opportunities to speak across divides, be able to learn from each other, work through conflictual situations in such a way that helps to build solidarity, which is really what we need if we're going to be shifting things to the scale that we know we need to, both locally and globally. So how does this translate into the collective that we speak of with those circles moving from inside to outside? The actions that we're looking to do more of and apply the theory to is actually comes from the collective. So this is a little bit different than the approach of which we would call maybe like a top-down, where we have one leader that says, here's what we're going to do, and everyone following it. But this actually really embraces the idea that when a group gets together, similarly in the way that like this group tonight is getting together for the first time ever. I can't imagine that all the exact same people have been in the exact same space at the exact same time. it provides an opportunity for ideas to emerge from that new collective. And that is one key indicator of what really identifies a transformational action. So we are also creating a safe space for engagement. And believing that when a couple of these things are in place, that's when the positive solutions can arise. And also help us to really approach the problems that we face from a different consciousness that created the problems. This well-known phrase that Einstein offered us. So these are some of the elements that we just hope to evoke and bring while we're working on these very important issues, trying to educate ourselves and each other about the value, for instance, of not investing in a natural gas pipeline or protecting our waters. And so just wrapping up. So just to wrap this all up, again, on behalf of all of us, and we're going to have some discussion here, so we'll all get a chance to say some more. I want to thank you for listening to the presentations and taking in these different approaches that we're offering, and also invite you to attend some more events. The group that put this on tonight is, again, called the Transformational Action Affinity Group, and one of the ways that we are continuing to practice this approach that we really believe in is going to be on April 21st. We're going to kind of do this forum again since this was our first go-around, and also incorporate an interfaith ceremony. So this will give us an opportunity to kind of deepen in our own selves and our practice and explore the ways that might help to provide more leverage and opportunity for change. So we really, if you're interested in what is being said and what my presentation was, then you can come to that event and kind of engage in a space that feels a little bit different than holding a sign, which is also very important to do. So these are some of the events. They are all on the handout that you hopefully received, and if you didn't, there's some more on the table. And then these are just some other specific actions that you can take to help with this issue and resisting this pipeline. Because I think that all the presenters did a really good job at helping us understand why it is so important to make a stand against this issue and know what we can do to be supporting the renewable energy that is possible. So I'll keep this up, and again, you have all that information on the handout. And I think at this point in time, we are going to open it up for discussion and dialogue about these events, next steps, any questions that you have regarding the material that you've heard tonight, and anything else that comes up. So, thank you.
We have recognized the importance of being able to face one another and talk a little bit afterwards. Obviously, these realities that we are looking into and relating with sink into our minds and into our bodies at different rates and are not necessarily that easy to hold. We need the support of one another, and we need to be able to connect with one another around them and to feel the support of one another. So for that reason, despite the advantages of being able to talk one-on-one, what I want to do is just bring our attention back around to the, if you've written down a question that you want to ask or any kind of topic for discussion or whatever like that, now's your chance to, is this an okay way to proceed?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll just call, please.
I can do staff. That's good over here.
Bob, you have the floor. If you're asking a question, just stand up, say your name, and
Bob Walker. Thank you guys, you did a great job. It seems to me that one of the things that would be really helpful, and apologies because I'm new to this, you guys may have been doing this already, but one of the things that would be really helpful would be to engage in a positive way those businesses that
Right.
we're trying to reach out to,
Yeah.
or that they're trying to reach out to, and talk to them about the alternatives and all of this stuff, educate them. And I guess I'm wondering, has that begun? What's the plans for moving forward? And one particular thing that I know is some work's been done in the past. Actually, Serge did a study 10 years ago on the landfill methane to serve Pike and Carroll Concrete. And I know that Lebanon's been looking at that, and I just don't know where that is at this point. Is it still moving forward?
I can speak to the last part of it. I can speak to the last part, because I'm on the Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee, and they are full steam ahead.
Louder.
Stand up. Relating to the last part of Bob's question, which was about the landfill gas to electricity.
And not just electricity, it can be heat too, combined heat and gas or both,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I believe that they're looking at just electricity. Mark Morgan is the head of solid waste. And I think it would make a megawatt of electricity, and they're looking to Lebanon being actually a utility, an aggregate, and that would provide a bunch of it. So we passed a motion a couple months ago, and it's going forward. They've been working on this for a long, long time. I do not know why Liberty Utilities keeps saying it's a potential source. Even in this present docket, they say that. It's not for them. So I don't know if it's cogen or not. Is Rainey here? Anyway, I can follow up with you if you want more.
Yeah, I would like, because I think that the heat would really help supplant Liberty's argument about at least Pike, because they.
Yeah, I don't think Liberty is going to be getting that methane that currently is.
No, but I mean, they might not have Pike as a customer if Pike was using the gas for heat
I see.
at their facility.
I see what you're saying.
And I could address, one of the other anchor customers is Dartmouth Hitchcock. And potential, yes, thank you. Correct, yes. Potential, yes. And I work at Mount Escutney Hospital, and we're now an affiliate with Dartmouth. And I got an invitation. I asked for the invitation. Next month, I'm going to their sustainability committee to speak to them about this very issue. So hopefully we'll.
And some of us have met with the director of communications there, who very much understands these issues. She worked for years in Massachusetts on renewable. I don't know if she wants to be identified. She's here today. She's here tonight. But at any rate, she can identify herself if she wishes. But Dartmouth Hitchcock is in a interesting position because they truck compressed natural gas and may continue to truck it, until they eventually, hopefully, go to renewables. So we're appealing to them almost on a moral basis to understand that if they become an anchor customer, that they're enabling or facilitating this project to happen. And if they pulled out, it probably wouldn't happen because they're so huge. So it's really a very tricky issue because we don't want to be judgmental about their energy decisions, and they would probably save money if it was piped instead, and they would save 8 trucks being delivered every day. So there are a lot of reasons why they might like this, and they turn to compressed natural gas at a time when the bridge fuel idea was prevalent, and indeed it still is prevalent amongst the majority of people, I think. I mean, the research that Stuart cited on methane leaks has only become really solid within the last 5 years, and the health impacts as well. So we haven't addressed Pike Industries, but your ideas are good.
Can I give you the floor?
Have you done outreach to Dartmouth students? Would that be helpful? There's some pressure points there.
Maybe Allie could speak to that. Allie is the community outreach organizer of the Sierra Club Ready for 100. I meant to point her out earlier. Apologies.
We have worked with Dartmouth students a bit. Dartmouth has a sustainability task force that is meant to report back on their findings this month. And they're looking to kind of replace their number 6 fuel oil, but also upgrade the whole school's like sustainability plan. So the students right now have been kind of engaged in putting some pressure on the college to accept the recommendations of the task force and to say no to natural gas. I think the divest Dartmouth students have been the most engaged in this work, but we haven't really been in touch with them super recently. It's been more about some of the other anchor customers. I think we've heard from Dartmouth that they're maybe not interested in natural gas, and so I think if you guys want to speak to that at all, but.
That's the rumor, is that they want to leapfrog over natural gas, but until it's a done deal, we don't know for sure.
So I was just going to say that the analysis of this group leading along has led us to the conclusion that DHMC is the pressure point, is the best point of leverage to get this thing stopped. So that is where the bulk of our focus is going. Yeah. In the back.
Hi, I'm Hanover with Lebanon. The economic thing was pretty impactful. I'm wondering if you could define whether there is any known information about what you refer to as the timeline for the bubble to burst. Does anybody think that economics people working on that, or geologists working with economic economists?
Yeah, Art, if you want to just search, Google search or YouTube search for Art Berman. He's a long-time analyst and geologist in the oil and gas industry. He's one person who I found has done a lot of modeling around the peak of production. And in order to do that, you have to make a number of different assumptions. One assumption he made, which I think, and he admitted, is optimistic, is that there'll be an unlimited amount of funding for these inherently uneconomic companies going forward. I think that would be the main limiting factor in terms of the actual what we actually get out of these wells. Also, too, is the fact that if the price point of these fuels were to go up to the point where these companies would be profitable again, it would price a lot of people out of the market, and so the demand would fall and the price would fall again. And so there's an upper limit to the price, just in terms of the overall economy. So that's another factor as well. But the depletion rate is so high, and the fact that they have, like for instance, in the Bakken, I believe, the overall number of new wells that have to be drilled is like 45% per year, in order to just have a flat level of production. So that was 1,500 wells per year as of a couple years ago. But now it's even more, because as you increase the number of wells, next year you have to drill even more wells in order to just have a flat level of production. So the number of wells that have already peaked and the plays that have peaked is dependent on the price. It's also dependent on the availability of easy money that these companies can get. And it's also dependent on the play. But overall, he said that most of the overall industry as a whole will probably peak in about 2020. And from that point on, if they continue to get an unlimited amount of funding, it could go out maybe another 20 years. But given the fact that when the industry peaks, they're going to have a really hard time attracting investors, because they'll have to admit that that there is such a steep decline rate, which they don't really like to talk about, obviously. So once the investors' money dry up, then I suspect that the drop-off will be very steep. So I think that anytime between now and 2025 is probably what we're looking at to be pretty much the end of this crazy Ponzi scheme.
I want to give Stuart a follow-up to that also.
Over there on the table, there's 3 fact sheets stapled together. The front one says natural gas, especially fracked gas, drives climate change. The third page is uncertainties in future gas production and prices. Grab this, because There's a couple of, a link to one of the articles that Carl was referencing by Art Berman called Why Cheap Natural Gas is History. And there's also a link to a paper done in the journal Nature by a team at University of Texas, team of petroleum engineers, geoscientists, and economists that conducted these studies, and they're forecasting a steep decline in production, again starting around 2020. And they're predicting real disruption for the U.S. economy as it becomes more and more dependent on gas. So grab the fact sheet, and you can see the references.
Evan James, Hanover. The energy issue is something I've been involved with for the better part of 40 years. Was part of the Seacoast Anti-Pollution League. At one time I was even with the Clamshell Alliance, who tried to stop seabird from happening. And the New Hampshire Energy Coalition, which was working hard with with the PUC for the argument against seabird. One of the things that a couple of the speakers have talked about tonight is the morality of this. I don't know if I'm pretty sure that most of you would be familiar with the subsidies that the government gives to oil at a very large scale with our tax dollars. And frankly, if those tax dollars were used for solar and geothermal and all those things, we would no longer have a need currently for fossil fuels. Has anybody in the room here heard of what our externalities are? Okay, a few people have. Externalities are the costs that we bear as taxpayers when something goes wrong, like the oil well in the Gulf, and fracking is loaded with these costs. The moral issue is that most of the fracking companies, especially out west, are wildcatters. They're small companies that start up. They do fracking for a while, and then they start up with the intention of going bankrupt. And that is something that is morally reprehensible. And so when you support fracked gas in any way, shape, or form, you're supporting that immorality. Because most of these wells, like they said, and the figure that was stated earlier, 1 million gallons per well, is a small well. And the bigger wells are about 8 million gallons of water. And if you're out west, water is a higher premium than oil. So when these wildcatters finish drilling and doing what they do, they literally declare bankruptcy, and they abandon all the infrastructure that dotted the landscape with. And that becomes our cost to deal with. The condensate tanks, the abandoned infrastructure, the pipelines, all of that we pick up the tab on. So the longer we support this, the longer we'll have to pay for it in all our tax dollars. And those tax dollars are not just our tax dollars, they're our kids' tax dollars. So this is an issue that I think the last gal, what's your name again? Karen spoke to. There's an awakening going on. People are starting to understand what these externalities are, and the moral issue and the moral imperative and the urgency of now that this issue represents. We owe it to our kids and their kids and the kids after that to do what's right here. And any time we take another step towards supporting this old dinosaur technology, we put that burden on our kids. So that's just what I have to say.
Thank you.
I moved here from Ohio 4 years ago. I had to get away from fracking. I came here because there's no shale. So I fought it for 2 years solid, so I'm well versed in all their tactics and all the costs, human and otherwise. And he's very right about what they do. They set up shell companies, typically in Wyoming, so that you can't sue them when things go wrong. You know, you might win a judgment, but then there's no way to collect the money. And many times, cities are left to deal with problems. Like you said, they declare bankruptcy. People's wells are contaminated, like a whole neighborhood got contaminated. They had to run city water up from a neighboring city to bring it into the township, and the taxpayers bared that burden. So, oh yeah, I could give you chapter and verse on all of it, but I wanted to say for DHMC, I think it's good to target them, because if that will be the one that will prevent it, that's the way to go. And you know, you have to tell them, hey, you know, you're a hospital. How's it going to look? You know, you're going to do something that's been, you know, very harmful to people's health, and then back it up with all those studies and whatnot. There's a good website called List of the Harmed. So if you Google fracking and List of the Harmed, they're keeping a list of every person that's been damaged in some way by fracking. So, you know, health issues and whatnot. And then lastly, I want to know who's in charge of the decision of whether this will go through. Is this a City of Lebanon decision or the state?
Well, there's two jurisdictions, of course. The jurisdiction that is discussing, looking at the question right now is Public Utilities Commission in the state of New Hampshire. They can, the question that they're being asked is whether or not to grant a franchise to the company to distribute natural gas in Lebanon and Hanover. Beyond that, as Ariel pointed out in her presentation, there's a city jurisdiction in Lebanon, and that will fall to the planning board and the zoning board. The planning board will have to approve the site plan, and the zoning board will have to grant a special exemption. Zoning board has already granted one special exemption to James Campion for the site that he owns on Signal Hill for a very similar proposal. So the people of Lebanon might want to ask the zoning board, well, how many special exemptions are you going to allow for gas infrastructure in the city?
We need a multi-pronged attack on this, you know, for sure. And did the city council have any say in this at all in Lebanon, or no?
I don't live in Lebanon. I think not. I think that if the time were right, if there were enough time, the city council could adjust the city master plan.
But the city could pass ordinances that would make this impossible to do.
That's right.
Okay, we have to look at anything, noise ordinance, anything that they could pass to keep it from happening. We can pressure them to do that.
Yeah. So it's a great point, because it is ultimately a political issue, and if the political pressure can be brought strongly to bear on the city policymakers, and we might get the outcome we want. Want to go here?
Yeah, just quickly, if we're talking to the planning board and the zoning board, we're not talking just about the site on 12A. Wouldn't we be talking about the whole route of that pipeline through all of our neighborhoods? And up Stem Hill and all the way across? I mean, that's impacting a lot of people in Lebanon that at this point don't realize that. And I think if we can activate those people, I don't think door to door.
Yeah, as I understand it, Liberty Utilities is intending to use public right-of-way for the entire route of the pipe, and that would mean, digging up City Street or sidewalk. And I don't know. I don't know who has jurisdiction over that.
That's a lot of people who could be angry about this.
Yes.
Right? And vocal.
Correct. Right, and we got to get them there.
Over here in the black.
The public educational value of this meeting is tremendous. And I'm so grateful that it's being videotaped. Now that should be shown on every access TV station in the whole region. You know, that, and people watch Access TV. So that, I mean, every single person who spoke tonight, with all your points of view, the wider region would be totally interested in this. Right? So thank God it's being videotaped, and we should use that, really go to every single access station.
I could also say that within 2 weeks, we're going to have a Vimeo link to share, so you can have a house party and show this to your neighbors and spread the word.
House parties are good, but I'm from Newport, Newport is economic development director, and 90% of Newport watches Access TV, including, you know, church services and every planning board meeting.
Okay.
So don't underestimate that. It's a very important vehicle to get the word out.
Over here too. We'll take 3 more questions here, Frederica.
I think you've been using the words natural gas and fracked gas interchangeably, but I think if we want to make a statement, we need to stick to fracked gas, because it was pointed out that it's not a natural gas at all. So it's not helpful to the cause to call it natural gas, and I think we should call it fracked gas, first of all. And then I had another question about the geothermal. Can I ask it?
You can.
The geothermal had 2 methods, air-to-air, which is what the Plainfield School uses, and water. And you said the most efficient one is probably water, but since fracking uses water and ruins it, and water is a limited resource, what happens to the water that's used in geothermal, and is that a good idea?
I don't understand everything about it, but it is a closed loop system. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
I can speak to
So it's
that.
not like there's huge amounts more water being poured into it. There's water in the system, but it circulates into the heaters that are right underneath us here, and then it goes down into the well, and it heats up again, and it comes back.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it runs through the floor.
Okay, so, great, thank you.
Yeah, okay, good. Next.
Kim, you have a question?
I was,
Yeah.
so I was wondering, so we talked about DHMC as being the major player. If they weren't, I mean, we can't get them to commit or not commit, right? I assume that nobody's heard that they would commit or not commit. Of all the other big players, is anyone committed? Or has anyone actually said they would not? I'm just wondering if we've got any commitments or non-commitments.
Well, strangely, there's no commitments. And
That's good.
in the pre-hearing conference on the 23rd, that was cited as a big weakness. That was the thing that sunk it last time. So it's a mystery to me, to be honest, because Liberty has had a long time to try to get.
What about hypertherm?
Yeah.
Hypertherm's listed as a potential customer, but they're not interested, although we don't have that in writing either.
Yeah.
Pike Industries is probably another huge anchor customer, and we haven't even addressed them, but your idea might be a good one. You know, to appeal to them on moral issues. I mean, it's not as easy.
Okay.
If somebody
We should do petition.
a petition is a good idea.
I'm going to give the last word, last comment over to.
We have one over here too.
Are they going to use the maps for, the Signal Hill site? Is they going to do DHMC? Or are they going to pipe it all the way from 12A?
Well, there are a lot of unknowns. The maps that I showed that it can get all the way to DHMC from 12A, but there is an option, I'm almost certain, on the land at Signal Hill, if they want to create a second whole storage facility and vaporization facility. So a lot of unknowns. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'd just like to say in closing that just to reiterate the point that if this pipeline goes in, it does represent a 50-year commitment to a track which is the opposite of what would be healthy for the future. So we've chosen to take this one on because we need to win it, and we think we can, which is to say we can win this one. It is by no means a done deal, but it is definitely possible. And it's simply a question of pressure and engagement. This is, if you stand back, this is a commitment to fossil fuels that the community would be making. And if the community can come forward in strategic ways and come forward together to say we will not make this commitment, then we can continue to keep the dream of 100% renewable by 2050 alive, and continuing to support the work that Ali and the Sierra Club has been doing, and other people on the Ready for 100 campaign. So that's a very, very hopeful campaign, and this is crucial for keeping that crucial campaign alive. This is an important pressure point. Please do not leave, I will give you were Stuart the last word, but please do not leave this room without putting your email in a place where we can find it, so that you will receive, for starters, until this working group gets a website up and running, you'll receive emails from Sierra Club and Ali, and you'll also receive emails from the Center for Transformational Practice. So if you see an email from info from the Center for Transformational Practice with fracked gas in the heading, you'll know where it came from and why. Okay, so final comments. We'll just go one, and then Ariel and Stuart, if you have any final words to add.
One quick strategy that's been sort of limitedly successful in Boost out west is communities are fighting fracking by making the frackers, whether they're wildcat or larger, pay for the externalities up front by taking a bond. And so one of the ways they do this is by putting a very high bond on it and saying, if you want to tackle this and do this in our county or our township or whatever, is that they make the bond so high on the front end that it makes it feasibly, economically unfeasible. So that's one strategy that might work here.
Also, can I say one more thing? I'm getting my thesis at Dartmouth, and last Wednesday I met with Joseph Helbley, who's the Dean of Air School. Monday I'd been to the 100% renewable meeting, and the very first question he asked me was, how'd that go? So Dartmouth College is enormously important in this. I mean, they just got this new energy institute. I mean, what are they going to do with that? Yeah. So the pressure is everything. So that in all ways, but we've got to be really public about it.
We should also be visible. We should be marching on the streets.
Yeah. So I would like to make an appeal along those lines, that if you're a person who feels like you could attend more sessions, strategic sessions, we need you. The Upper Valley Transformational Action Affinity Group has emerged and embraced this issue. And I'm very grateful, because before that, Stuart helped me intervene last time. He did all the heavy lifting. He did all the writing of the whole docket for a year and a half. And no, it's true. And there were a lot of people in the community, but we need good thinking. And Don Kreese, who's the consumer advocate in New Hampshire, gave some advice. I had asked the Sierra Club of New Hampshire to intervene, and they couldn't for a variety of reasons, but he wrote a thing that I could share with them. And in it he said, the Public Utilities Commissioners are almost certain to approve this, because all that Liberty needs to prove is that they have managerial, technical, and administrative capacity. It's a very narrow bandwidth that they have to demonstrate. It's as Peter Kobaki from Hanover the other day said, unfortunately it's not the Public Citizens Commission, it's the Public Utilities Commissions, and their job is very narrow. And Stuart and I last time tried to introduce the greenhouse gas emissions aspect of gas, which we knew was not within the Commission's purview, and we were told as much. They said this is irrelevant. We tried to get studies admitted into the record. The word irrelevant. And their bosses are the legislative committees. So, good luck with changing that. So I like your optimism. It's going to take some creative thinking and some major organizing of certain kinds to win this. It's not going to be an easy win. And so if you haven't signed the sign-in sheet, please do. And if you have signed the sign-in sheet, maybe put an asterisk by your name to show that you'll come to another meeting like soon, because we need to wrap our heads around this and our hearts. So thank you so much for your time.
I just wanted to add to what, very briefly to what Ariel said. Don Priest did say that the Liberty Utilities is going to win in the PUC, but he also said they can win and still not end up with this pipeline. One way that they can lose is if they lose the same way they did last time, which they didn't have any customers. And that's what we can affect. So,
Yeah.
Compression station involved in this?
Yeah.
Gonna be.
Okay, because one thing we might be able to do, the city of Pittsburgh was able to ban fracking because they made clean air and water a civil right, and they made fracking a violation of that.
Yes. Okay. If there's a compressor station involved, that's going to put significant emissions into the air. And if we pass an ordinance of that nature, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.